So I just want to welcome everyone to this interview that we're going to have with Andrew Harvey. And while I give Lynn a moment to attend to logistics, I thought maybe I would just let everyone know what a thrill it's been to get to know him through his writings and through his interviews, and just give everyone a little taste. As soon as we see him take that chair, I will stop talking. But he's just this incredible energy and commitment and living right on the edge of, we're all kind of finding our way to guidance. And this is someone who has committed his whole life, body, soul, energy to actually what he calls regenerating. And I was listening earlier today, I thought maybe I'd just share, he was saying how the invitation at this unprecedented evolutionary moment is to hold two opposites that we've never, ever held before. His words. I certainly don't have a scope of the evolutionary mystic perspective as he does, but what he says is we've never had this opportunity before to hold opposites so diametrically opposed at the same time. And while this can seem like kind of like way out there, beyond, it certainly seems like it's beyond me, it really points us right back into the crux of our own spiritual practice. And so what he talks about is we have this possibility or even likelihood of actual extinction, not just human, but all kinds of different forms in nature. I mean, actual extinction is what we're looking at. And it's just one of those things that is bubbling up right now. And he says at the very same time, so you hold that, and it's dark, and it shows up in how divided we feel from others. It shows up in these autocratic arisings around the world. It shows up, just look at the Middle East today. Just look at how India is being ravaged by this virus. All these ways that we're seeing basically just what can look like destruction. It can look just, to many, I think it looks like end of days. And he says at the same time, what we hold is this, he calls it this extraordinary sun, like the power of the sun of regenerative possibility that's rising up in the evolutionary mystics' testimony. And that's what he's here to give us, the evolutionary mystics' testimony of what? Of the potential birth of a new species. It's like, what? So it's at the same time, so the one point it's like dark and you're looking at this and you're thinking, what's going to happen? And yet if you step back, what the mystics tell us is every gorgeous, new, beautiful thing that was ever born came out of the energy of utter destruction and darkness. And he says basically that the world right now, this world, our world, is having a evolutionary dark night of the soul. Mm-hmm. And we have a front row seat to it. We get to actually watch all these forces that appear to be tearing at the very fabric, and have the evolutionary mystics speak to that. So here we are. We have the master himself. And so I am thrilled to introduce not only Andrew Harvey, but Lynn Castaldo, who's going to be taking the helm of this interview. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Anne. Also, that was great. I'm just going to give a little background. All right. Andrew Harvey was born in South India in 1952, the same year I was born.
Oh.
He lived there for 9 years. He entered Oxford University in 1970 with a scholarship to study history. At the age of 21, he became the youngest person ever to be awarded a fellowship to All Souls College, England's highest academic honor. By 1977, he returned to India, where he had a series of mystical experiences, and that started his spiritual journey. He has studied Rumi and Sufi mysticism. He has also studied other religions like Hinduism, Buddhism, and Christianity. He is also the founder and director of the Institute for Sacred Activism. Sacred activism is a transforming force of compassion in action that is born of a fusion of deep spiritual knowledge, courage, love, and passion, with the wise radical action in the world. He has written and edited over 30 books, and he's still involved in writing. And some of the well-known titles are Dialogues with the Modern Mystic, Hindu Journey, The Essential Mystics, Son of Man, The Return of the Mother, and The Direct Path. And his newest release is The Radical Regeneration, which is written with Caroline Baker. So did I miss anything? What else would you like to share to introduce yourself?
Perfect. Well done. Thank you. So we come from the same year. We're both veterans. My 69th birthday is coming up in June, so I'm feeling very august at this moment.
Another comparison, I'm also in June. Isn't that funny?
Ah, Geminis, yes. There's several of us here right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, one other thing I would like to make out as an announcement. If anybody has a question, please either post it or raise your hand, and Sina will let us know. So, in your latest book, The Radical Regeneration, that you have written with Caroline Baker, you start out defining the three essential spiritual definitions of transformation, transfiguration, and transmutation. Could you share with us your explanation of what these mean and where they will take mankind?
Well, let me read them as they are, because we worked very hard on them, and if I can find them, I will do so. Transformation is profound change of heart and mind, of consciousness itself, flowering in a life lived with divine energy, passion, compassion, and purpose. It's the indispensable first stage of evolution. But there's a big leap then, and that takes us to the heart of the mystery that is enshrined in the depths of the mystical traditions, and especially in the great evolutionary mystics such as Sri Aurobindo and Teilhard de Chardin, Bede Griffiths, the ones who are my particular inspiration. And that takes us to transfiguration, a far more complete change, not merely of heart, mind, and consciousness, but specifically and amazingly of the body itself, the great secret known by all authentic mystical traditions. Bede Griffiths, who lived this truth at the end of his life in the late 1980s and early 1990s, wrote, "Body and soul are to be transfigured by the divine life and to participate in the divine consciousness. There is a descent of the spirit into matter and a comparative corresponding ascent by which matter is transformed by the indwelling power of the spirit, and the body is transfigured." This may come as a wild bit of news to many of you, but one of the things that I've done in the last 30 years is to plunge into this process myself because of the inspiration of Bede, and into the secret depths of the mystical traditions, where very high adepts knew that humanity's destiny was to be transfigured, not just in the mind, not just in the heart, and not just through the awakened soul, but actually also in the body. And this is the deepest meaning, for example, of Christian mysticism. This is why Jesus' last sign to us, last living sign, is the resurrection, the new body that we're all being taken to potentially. And then there's another quantum leap, because one of the things that you discover when you plunge into authentic mystical path is that the possibilities of the transformations in divine love are endless, because divine love is infinite, so the transformations in it must be infinite. Look, one of the most astonishing things, and this comes from Sri Aurobindo's work and the work of his great consort, the Mother, and their great disciple, Satpram, is that they envisaged a stage beyond even transfiguration. which I call transmutation. And this is wild. The mysterious final stage, the transformation followed by transfiguration, opens onto. It is nothing less than the potential birth of a new human species, as different from our current humanity as Christ or Buddha are from our caveman ancestors. It is a distant but possible goal, known to our greatest evolutionary mystics, such as Bede Griffiths and Teilhard and Sri Aurobindo the Mother and Satpram. Why we laid out those definitions at the beginning of our book, Radical Regeneration, Carolyn Baker and my book, is because we realize that what we are now in is a major evolutionary convulsion. Terrible and challenging and amazing. And we realize that unless we can begin to understand some of the laws of this great evolutionary transformation, we are simply not going to get through this devastating period. So I plunged many years ago into the great evolutionary mystics to try and understand what was happening in myself and what was transmitted to me by my great teacher, Father Bede Griffiths, who was living through this transformation and transfiguration. And what I have discovered, and what Carolyn Baker agrees with, is that this global, terrifying, paralyzing, extremely dangerous dark night that the entire world is now in, is also potentially, and this is what is astonishing and amazing and gives a very rugged hope in the face of so much obviously erupting agony and disaster, is potentially the birth canal that has been ordained by the divine to birth a new embodied divine humanity. What's extraordinary when you really look at mystical history, and I've looked at it in the Sufis and the Buddhists and the Hindus and the Christians and the Taoists and in the shamanic traditions, is that we have in mystical history beings who went through the dark night into the birth not only of divine consciousness, which is wonderful enough, but into the transfiguration process and have given us astonishing details and astonishing maps for this process. So that's what our book is about. It's about facing unflinchingly the dark night and aligning with three essential possibilities. First, the possibility of the dark night process itself. Because when you understand that this crisis that we're in is a mystical crisis, an evolutionary crisis, and when you look at the evidence of those who have gone through the dark night, what you realize is something that should give you real hope. And that is that the dark night looks like extinction. And there are many reasons for us to believe that we're on a road to extinction at this moment. Anybody who doesn't believe that is blind. We're in an exploding crisis on every level. But if you look more deeply at the dark night process, what you understand is that it's perfectly designed to end one identity, one false identity, one false self, and through tremendous suffering, but also through tremendous revelation, birth another, and that is the divine human. So we've written a book which is totally unflinching in its acceptance of this terrifying process, because what we want to point to is that first of the three really important points, which is to understand the dark night process as a birthing process. The second thing that we are presenting in this book is a vision of exactly how, as far as we can understand it, the transfiguration process actually works. And we've presented for the first time a four-part path to transfiguration that draws on all of the major mystical traditions. And it has never been presented in this way before, because we believe it's the key to what is happening and we need to align with it. And the third thing that we know we all have to pursue, as well as aligning with the dark night as a birthing process, as well as aligning with the transfiguration possibility, is what I've called sacred activism, because we are going to have to turn up in this extreme crisis, groundedly and sanely, but very urgently, acting from as sacredly inspired a consciousness as possible, to try and turn the various terrible challenges that we face around. So when you bring together those three forces, the aligning with the laws of the dark night, the aligning with the laws of the transfiguration process, and accepting the challenge that this time presents all of us, which is to stop thinking of mystical inquiry as just a private search for liberation, but as a fuel for inspired global action, then you have what we hope is a very exalted and very challenging, but very inspiring and hopeful recipe for radical regeneration. So that's what I'm up to.
Carolyn Baker stresses that we must not let go until we awaken to our divine humanity. So could you share about the sacred unit of the inner and the external sciences that I've heard you speak about? Explain that rock of hope that is needed now to move us forward.
Well, I think I've sketched it out. But what I'd like to say about the inner and outer sciences comes from a conversation that I've had with the Dalai Lama, a conversation that has gone on for a long time. And what he has been stressing, and what I actually believe too, is that humanity in this crisis has access to two interlinked kinds of science that could be immensely powerful in our dealing with this crisis. On the one hand, we have for the first time in human history a science which is open to the paradoxical magic of how the universe truly is and exists. We have that in quantum physics, which is opening up absolutely astounding possibilities to humanity of working with the field of reality from a place of profound intention to be able to effect really quite miraculous changes, potentially. That's the outer sciences, which themselves are opening up in this fantastic and extraordinary way. And if you want a book that will really initiate you into how amazing this transformation of the outer sciences is, go to Paul Levy's magnificent book, Quantum Revelation. But we also have available to us, and this is equally amazing, we have available to us all the treasures, all the maps, all the great sacred technologies of the major mystical systems. And when you go through a serious and authentic and demanding and rigorous mystical journey that eventually awakens you onto the fringes of divinization, you understand with awe and amazement just how scientific the maps that the great mystical traditions have given us are, how extraordinarily precise they are in their understanding of the different stages that need to be unfolded for the full installment of the divine in the human to take place. And what the Dalai Lama said to me was, imagine what's possible now. Imagine a global heart-mind that knew that quantum physics was opening up this astonishing, realistic, but absolutely magical and paradoxical vision of reality that gives us wholly new powers. And imagine if the rational addiction of the West could shift and it could accept that in the great mystical traditions, we also have scientific maps of how the authentic process of divinization unfold. And imagine if we could bring them together in a dynamic, interdependent, sacred marriage in which the scientists would go through mystical disciplines to open themselves even more profoundly to the divine consciousness that's the ground of the field that they're beginning to experience in quantum physics. And the mystics on the earth could get a lot clearer, a lot more serious, a lot more devoted to actually undergoing the stages that could birth them into a wholly new evolutionary level. And that marriage of the outer and inner sciences is, I think, the cutting edge of our contemporary journey. And we're at the beginning of it. But there is an extraordinary dialogue taking place, specifically in the Dalai Lama, but in many other mystics and scientists, which is the dialogue, I believe, that will be of the most help on our evolutionary journey at this moment.
I am I think, a somewhat more simple person than your grand, your vocabulary alone is like just a like a grand ride. But what's behind it, what I hear you saying is the only way we can hold these two thrilling, exciting, terrifying, never seen before opposites. On the one hand, the possibility, even the likelihood of actual extinction for us and other little woodland creatures and ways other creatures.
Yeah.
And at the other hand, hold that innate, yet for many, undiscovered, unknown, regenerative possibility that is just like not only rising, but awaiting our turning to it, awaiting our coming to it, awaiting our opening to it. And with all the trust and the faith that requires, the only way we can hold them and truly, authentically, though, not in some, kind of interesting but esoteric languaging, but in authentic embodying of it, in my very simple language, or at least it begins with just a absolute, wholehearted, unquestioning surrender to not knowing, but trusting that will be shown. It's like a commitment to the inner teacher that may feel like it's beyond our ability or capacity, because frankly, it is beyond our ability and capacity. It is having such trust in that divine regenerative possibility that actually brings it about.
I think you put it so beautifully. Blessed are the simple. If you're simple, we need you. Thank you. Well, surrender is the key. Absolutely.
It's surrender, and it's guidance, even when we don't think we hear it, even when we don't think we have it, even when we don't think we're the ones that, because it's looking where we don't think we're necessarily going to find it.
Right.
Where else could it be? Where else could it be?
It's inside us, and there is a teacher within, and grace is pouring down, and people will be taken forward, and truths will be revealed, and they are essentially very simple truths. They're astonishing and awe-inspiring, but they are simple. So please stay simple. My job is to give a grand overall picture, but believe me, if you've read my work, you'll know that I have worked very, very hard all these years to make things as precise and clear to as many people as possible. So let's speak about surrender.
Yes.
And I'd love to quote to you a poem that I love, which is actually, for me, the poem that is our poem at this moment, at this great evolutionary moment. And it's a poem by Rumi. And one of the astounding things about Rumi is that he lived through the process that we're now living through as a whole of humanity. In terms of his own personal life, he was absolutely torn apart and shattered beyond imagining by the death of the man who was his beloved, probably murdered, in fact, by his own son, because his own son thought that this man was mad and misleading his father. And Rumi went into a period of 3 years of madness and emerged through surrender into becoming a fountain of the world's greatest mystical poetry, someone who was living in a very simple, visceral, natural, a wild, amazing way, the new divine human, and creating out of it. And he wrote the greatest poem about this process, which I don't believe is too complicated for anybody to get who has ever understood one important thing, which is that in life, it's very often your most terrible experiences, the experiences you fear most, that if you can trust them and surrender to them and hang on the cross of them, will reveal to you unbelievable new depths in yourself and open up amazing possibilities that could not have been there without going through the very things that you were most terrified of. So many people, everybody has the chance in life to experience that through great loss, through great heartbreak, through great personal tragedy. And here is the poem. And this is not fancy stuff. This is not grand vocabulary. This is the truth of life and of this particular terrifying aspect of life, that you have to die into life in the end. And here it goes. It goes like this. The grapes of my body can only become wine after the trampler tramples me. I surrender my body like grapes to his trampling, so my inmost heart can blaze and dance with joy. And although the grapes go on sobbing blood and screaming, I cannot bear any more anguish, I cannot bear any more cruelty. The trampler stuffs cotton in his ears and says, it is I who am the master of this work, and I am not working in ignorance. But when, through my passion, you reach perfection, you will never be done praising my name. You can take that poem and relate it to an agony that you go through in life, an agony of being abandoned or betrayed or losing something of infinite preciousness to you. If you trust grief, if you step into that river of grief, you will find that it will take you to a new destination in which you will be much wider, more spacious, more generous, more compassionate. And that's what this process in the world is ordained to do. One humanity is quite clearly incapable of dealing with the absolutely appalling and now lethal crises that it's created out of its madness, its hubris, its lust to domination, its total ignorance of other species, its unbelievable folly and illusion. And it's obvious that if we go on as we are, we will die out, because look what's happening right now. We're unable to deal with the climate crisis. We're unable to control the pandemic crisis. We're unable to deal with the horrible crisis in capitalism that's producing very rich people and very poor people and very little in between. We are hopelessly unable to deal with the terrifying Israeli-Palestinian crisis. All the major crises find us helpless limitless and stuck in ancient, tribal, violent, stupid, vulgar, crazy, and destructive patterns. That's the bad news. But the good news is that the very depth of our failure is creating an intolerable situation which millions of people are waking up to. A situation that is psychically the equivalent of a heartbreak, an abandonment, a loss, a betrayal, but on a global scale, but felt intimately. And that if we can together learn from the great mystics that this process has a meaning, that this dying is not the end, but an opening, that this shattering is a necessary precedent to renewal, then out of our worst nightmare, which is now materializing everywhere, can birth astounding new possibilities of global cooperation, of extraordinary creativity, of people coming together to really do something real and amazing about the climate, about inequality. All the problems have been created by us, and they can all be transformed if we transform. And the extremity of the crisis is ordained and designed to give us this tremendous opportunity through tremendous suffering and shattering to open to mystery and be transformed by mystery. That's not complicated. It's very difficult, but it's not complicated.
I'm sorry, I'm hearing an echo. It's not complicated. It's just very difficult. Could be the understatement of time, because
it's the understatement of all time. You put it very well, yes.
Okay. So,
but we have no option now. We have to do this,
yeah, right. Freedom's just another word for nothing left.
Nothing left to lose, and you ain't got nothing. If
That's right. Me and Bobby.
Janis Joplin, one of the greatest mystical philosophers of all time, with that voice, and it's true. Freedom does cost that much.
So speak to us, if you could, about the guts and the courage and the singular focus that's necessary. It's almost like it's not what do we do about it. It's how
what do we do about us? Yes.
How do we become? How do we rise to that courage?
Well, the first thing that we do is realize we're in a pretty derelict, beaten down, selfish, narcissistic state, which is the ground and the root of this vast crisis. We suffer that. The second thing that we do is truly realize that we are in absolutely shattering danger. Look at what's happening in America. We have one whole party now addicted to lies, believing a psychotic, pretending that the January the 6th insurrection was a tourist trip. That's literally a quote from a congressman. And that is the seedbed for major extremist violence and for fascist rule. That is terrifying. American democracy is hanging by a thread. And a lot of people are still in a dream, in a fantasy, in a new age fantasy of love and light. It will require real facing of real shattering circumstances. That's the second thing. The third thing that will be required, I can't hear you, Danny. This is very difficult to have a conversation without being hearing you. I'd love to hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies. I'm just getting my mom to get the dog because he keeps barking and he keeps barking.
Oh, that's important. That is important. Don't worry about it. The third thing is that I just would like to say to everybody, if you think that you can get through this crisis without making a major leap into your true identity through humble prayer and through humble meditation and through really opening to mystical reality, you are walking into a forest fire dressed in a paper tutu. It won't work. So get real about the necessity now of having a serious spiritual practice, which over time will reveal to you more and more of what you really are. And the more you really find out what you really are and what you really are not, the braver you become, because you realize that the essential part of you is deathless, will never die because it's never been born, and that there is nothing that can destroy that. And that will give, in my experience, that gives you a great deal of courage. And the fourth thing is to understand, really, that you're being challenged not just to open up to your mystical truths, but to use that opening as fuel and foundation for serious action. Because the problem cannot be solved by simply having fabulous experiences of who you might essentially be or not be. The problem can only be solved by people who use their deepest spiritual knowledge to give them the courage to stand up and do something about these problems together. So those four things, and they're all difficult, but we don't have any hope of getting through without accepting those difficulties. You see what's going on, and this is really important to understand, and we've laid this out in the book. If you look at evolutionary science of evolution, what you've discovered, and Stephen Jay Gould and other great scientists have told us this, is that species mutate through extreme, potentially annihilating crises. They don't have a gradual evolution. You don't go from a fish to a bird, which is what happened, without an intervening period of terrible trial. What happened between fishes and birds, it's interesting because millions of years ago there was a toxic sea and the fish leapt out of that toxic sea onto the burning sand. They didn't have the equipment to breathe in this new dimension. Hundreds of thousands of them died, but others just kept trucking blindly with tremendous passion. And over time, they grew the organs and the wings that made them birds. That's how that mutation worked. And this is how this mutation is going to go. It's going to go through very extreme pressure. So get with the program, stop pretending it's not going on, plunge into mystical practice, start realizing that everything is at stake, and start understanding that you're being challenged to become a sacred activist, and stop pretending that you are going to be exempt. You will not be. The whole world is going through this. And stop pretending, most of all, that this terrifying mutation, this terrifying evolutionary process is not happening. Because if you pretend, you will be part of the ferocious darkness that is now hobbling us. Your only hope is to wake up and do the work and give your life and surrender for the birth of a new humanity. Was that simple enough?
Yeah, oh my God. It's so inspiring. It's not just a call to arms. It's a call to body. It's a call to soul. It's a
yes, it's absolutely. The whole thing has to mutate to be. Yes. You see, the crisis is so vast and so intense that where we are now and with what we have, we're completely helpless. The Love and Light Brigade can't deal with this because they're in La La Land, obviously. A great deal of the old mysticisms can't deal with this because they've been addicted to transcendence. They've been addicted to God, God, God. But God is actually also embodied. God is you and I talking right now. God is the man that I saw this morning holding his baby after his wife and his 4 children had been killed by the Israelis in the most unspeakable attack, sobbing because he was so blinded by grief. That's also God. And here we are in this extremity. So if we're going to have a hope of dealing with it, we've got to face that and be shattered open by that and allow that to really begin to bitch slap the hell out of us and bitch slap us awake. Because if we continue to act in these ways, we are digging a vast grave for us and the rest of the creation, and we're going to fall into it soon. But if we get with the mystical program and use our understanding of the different mystical traditions and of the great mystics and the great evolutionary mystics in the way that Carolyn and I have presented in a very clear way for people in this book, if we do that, and if we truly do the inner work and the outer work ourselves, then we're participating in a great evolutionary shift, which should give us all a sense of meaning and purpose and nobility. So it's the choice before everyone. You can pretend all of this isn't happening. You can go into fake mysticism and say it's all an illusion. Wait until you're holding your child, your one surviving child of 4 children murdered. Tell me it's an illusion then. Stop all this BS. Get real, get down, get heartbroken, get practicing the mystical truths. Do the work and start coming together in radical sacred activism, because that's the one hope you and I have. I'm going to be 69. I've lived a long and glorious life. I'm not afraid of the future, but I'm afraid of your future.
One of the prayers that inspired you by Teresa of Avila, I would just like to read it now because I think it's so beautiful. It says, "The beloved has no body on earth but mine. The beloved has no hands on the earth but mine. Mine are the eyes through which the beloved streams compassion into the world. Mine are the hands with which the beloved is to bless all beings. May I have the grace to know this mystery, the courage to give myself to it entirely, and the strength to enact its truth in the world. Amen."
Grace, courage, and strength, yes. That's what all of us need. And it's available. I'm very fierce about the world, but one thing I do know from the depths of my own suffering and my own experience of my own dark night is that even when you are deeply shattered, perhaps most of all when you are deeply shattered, if you can continue to love, love will give you grace and strength and courage. It's those who don't let themselves be shattered that grace cannot reach. This crisis we're in is going to shatter everybody. If you're not shattered now, just wait, you will be. So get with the shattering as an immense blessing. Get with that absolute searing and burning down of our illusions as a tremendous blessing. Because look where our illusions have gotten us, to a burning world with absolutely no real hope except in a major transformation, transfiguration, transmutation.
Let's, oh, Lynn, go right ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna, so you can imagine, for those of us that have not had the mystical experiences that shows us the truth is true, that allows us to let go of the belief that we're the person, that allows us to just free fall, knowing that if we burn for the glory of God, and if we land, guidance will tell us what to do next. for those of us that aren't there yet, but have the calling in our hearts, have made that soul decision to awaken, and are at perhaps what could be considered by some, perhaps a bit more of a baby step, in doing the work. I wonder if I can only imagine how much, one of the words for it is purification, but I can only imagine how much energy, how much pain, how much heartbreak you have been, assisted by grace, whatever the words would be, just allowed to come through the system. And what I'm wondering is if you can talk to us about when you started this, about the beginning of how you kind of got to the point, because it's to some it could seem like, let it burn. I can hardly let myself get angry. I feel too fearful. And so if you could walk us through that, I think we could all relate to that.
Well, I think the most important thing that I could say to you is to trust in practice. Trust. It doesn't matter where you are. We're all beginners. I'm beginning every single day. I promise you. I don't feel that I'm at some grand, lofty place. I have had amazing death rebirth experiences. I see the divine light. I am blessed to know through grace these secrets and to be able to transmit them. That is a huge blessing. But I'm also aware every single day how much I don't know. The more I live, the more I know I don't know. So what I would do if you are really resonating with what I'm saying is just humble up and present yourself as you are to your beloved, to the divine, and just do very simple practices, but do them with great sincerity. The best practice is saying the name of God. That all of the mystics in all of the traditions will tell you that if you can find a name for the beloved that you relate to, it could be Jesus, it could be Durga, it could be Buddha, it doesn't matter who it is, but if you love that name, just say that name with great reverence, and you will find that over time you'll be steadied and things will be revealed to you. You'll be taught things in dreams, in meetings, in synchronicities. Reality will start to open to you, and it's magic. The magic of the play of the divine will become real to you, but you have to take that first step into humble practice. Secondly, read especially the really great mystical poets, because they will thrill you. Read Rumi. Read my beloved Kabir. I spent 3 years in a log cabin translating and recreating Kabir, and I got this book out called Turn Me to Gold. Kabir is one tough MF, and he is totally simple and totally in your face. And there's nobody who won't get something from what Kabir is saying, because Kabir freaked out all the hierarchies and all the big shots, and he is loved by butchers and bakers and candlestick makers and prostitutes and people like us, real people. So read the really great mystical poets to infuse you with truth, because if they are the ones who will tell it to you in the way that will be most enchanting and inspiring to you. Third, make sure that in this terrible period, you stay as inspired as possible by beauty. Go into nature and adore nature, nakedly, simply, drinking in all the gorgeous golden strength of nature, the mountains, the trees, the rivers, the seas, the light, this immense, beautiful spring that's exploding all around us right now. You have all of the great arts to inspire you from. You have music, you have dance, you have painting. Drink deep of the great ones. Love them. Let them speak to you of the beauty and holiness and wonder of life, and drink deep, because you're going to need that wine. All of those things, everyone, wherever they are, can do. They can say the name of God. They can read with reverence and humility the great mystical poets and begin to be enchanted into this vaster vision of who they really are. And they can become lovers of beauty. And beauty is a supremely powerful force to give us guts and passion, the sense of the splendor of the life that we are called to protect and honor. So those three things.
That's gorgeous, gorgeous. Thank you.
That's how I did it, because I started a complete wreck and a total skeptic, but I had such overwhelming experiences. And also I was a privileged and extremely successful intellectual, which was another huge block, because I really believed my own propaganda. So God had to hit me on the head with astounding experiences. But you won't necessarily have those kinds of horrible blocks if you start from a simple place of saying, teach me, beloved, show me your face, help me. You know that I'm in a burning world. You know that the world is burning, that people are, this is a vast lunatic asylum. Help me wake up, and in return, I'll say your name. I'll do a little meditation. I'll pray. I'll yearn, and I'll ask you simply from the depth of my heart, do you think that the beloved will refuse to give you what you need? Of course not. The divine is longing for us to turn up in that simple, naked way, with a few simple, naked practices that we do with reverence and persistence. And then look at the creation, look at the great beauty that we've been given in the arts, and drink from them and support them and inspire yourself. And don't let the paralysis and the despair ground you too deeply, even when they are grounding you, when you're diving into them. Take Rumi with you, take Kabir with you, take Bach with you, take Beethoven with you, take Tina Turner with you.
So if you have to, you can roll down the river, can't you? So,
yes. Anybody can. And it's often the simplest people who do the best in these circumstances, because they're the humblest people. I had to be broken in many ways, because my brilliance made me unhumble. But the simple people that I've met, the Indians in the streets and the people all over the world, the Aborigines, they are so in tune because of their natural humility. So
getting practical again, when we take this into our practice.
I've been practical completely. Without vision, the people perish. I've given you a very grand vision. I've given you very practical answers to all of your questions. So what more practical answers would you like?
What I was going to try to articulate is when we're sitting and we're contemplating, and the guidance is just be still, just be open, just be neutral. And you're like, but it's kind of like Rome is burning, this is happening. And I myself can feel I was very fortunate to be raised in a family of activists. I mean, they marched, they got put in jail, they got held in contempt. And yet part of the practice has been to let go of even that identity.
Yes.
Because that's not guidance. That's Anne doing what Anne needs to do out of fear, because she thinks she has to get in there and change it. And we all know when you just bring that energy to it, you're actually just pouring gasoline. So if you could talk to us about feeling the energies for those of us that are just dying to help, but the energy we would do it with would not be pure, would not be guidance. It would be a fuel-based, kind of like fix-it energy. And that's not the divine activism that you're talking about.
No, it isn't. And thank you for bringing that up. But, I think meditation is not for people at the beginning, because most people at the beginning have minds too scrambled. That's why the great mystics of the past have said, start saying the name of God, start loving in your heart and saying the name, because then you have something to do. You concentrate on the saying of the name, and that opens up states of silence and peace and joy. But if you just sit there and try and meditate, most people will find their heads whirling like Sybil in The Exorcist. So don't start meditation until you're already beginning to experience, through saying the name, another you that lives inside you, and then you may be ready to start doing the silent meditation that will open up tremendous doors to you. And even then, you need techniques to clear your mind. So one wonderful thing to do is to take a poem, to saturate your mind with the beautiful poem of Rumi's, to really, really enter your own sacred heart space and then sit. Or play a piece of beautiful music that calms you down and elates you and elevates you, and then sit. Work out what you need to enter your own sacred heart space and then sit. So that's the practical advice for that. Look, it's quite clear that mystics as they are now and activists as they are now are going to be of no earthly or heavenly use in this vast crisis. Most of the mystics will be sitting on their cushion, oming and shmoning when the last tree burns down and the last whale chokes to death on plastic in the oceans. And most activists will be raving and screaming and alienating almost everybody by their self-righteousness, and so preventing the success of the very causes that they're so nobly, in certain ways, espousing. It's obvious. But what is very exciting, and this is the key to the vision of sacred activism that I laid out in my book, The Hope, which has begun a global movement of sacred activism, is that if you bring the best of the mystic together with the best of the activist, something new is created. If you bring the mystic's passion for union with reality together with the activist's passion for justice, if you bring those two together, then the mystic's narcissism, which is a narcissism of addiction to experiences and to the light and to being superior and floating about in some lofty transcendent realm, which is horseshit. Let me tell you, most of the mystics who do it couldn't tell the transcendent realm from a banana. And if you just go on as an activist screaming and raving and shouting and thinking that you have the truth and everybody else is just a crazy demon, none of that's going to work. But if you marry the deep wisdom and passion and strength and luminous awareness of the mystic with the passion for justice and the courage to stand up of the activist, then you have a new kind of human being. Someone who, through their mystical opening, is able to receive sacred guidance for their action, and who's able to work on their egos so that they don't activate the egos of others, and so as they can be as inclusive and all-embracing and helpful as possible. And over time, you can build an enormous new force, like the force that Gandhi built, the force of Satyagraha, the soul force that over time overthrew the British, or the force that Martin Luther King engendered through his marriage of deep spirituality and action, the force that Valencia and Solidarność brought together to unseat the Russians, the force that Mandela and de Klerk actually also managed to create so that the South Africa could go through its healing. This force is here, but it requires true work and true humility and deep practice, as well as sacred action, and sacred action as well as practice. But over time, you will find that you will become a different kind of person, able to be guided in your actions through sacred consciousness, and able to be patient and persistent and wise and skillful in your action, because grounded in deep spiritual awareness. That's the Christ, that's Gandhi, that's the truth of the Mahayana vision of the Bodhisattva. This is the new kind of human being that is trying to be born at this moment, one that brings together all of the opposites, all the things that have been kept apart.
That's a good explanation. Thank you. One of the things that you have said is, what breaks my heart? You know, I've heard you talk about the sacred activism with going deep within your heart to find out where you should be led. And I think one of the other important things is the patience. You know, we have a saying here, rest, accept, and trust. And that patience is so important too.
Yes. Not well. You have to be impatiently patient, don't you? You have to have patience, but also have urgency. That's another marriage of opposites. You've got to know what you really want to accomplish and go for it very persistently and very remorselessly to yourself, but also very patiently. People often ask me, you know, what should I do? What should I do? What should I stand up for? What should I act for? And what I always say to them is, follow your heartbreak. Dare to ask yourself one very, very difficult question to answer. And that is, what of all the things that are out there breaks my heart the most? Because one of the games the ego plays is, I just don't know what to do because I'm so worried and so heartbroken about all of these things. And that gives you a perfect excuse not to stand up to do anything. And you all know people who are like that, and you in fact be still one of those people. But if you actually wake up at, say, 4 o'clock in the morning tomorrow and surround yourself by the peace of God, and dare to ask yourself, what of all of the terrible things in the world that are now erupting actually is so painful for me that I can hardly bear to think of it? That will be what you're called to do something about, because you'll discover what all the great sacred activists have discovered is that when you allow yourself to really identify your major heartbreak and start doing something with other people about it, you'll also discover an extraordinary depth of passion energy that will never stop flowing in you, that will give you somehow the courage and the guts and the persistence to continue pouring yourself out to help. When I ask myself that question, I can see all of these crises. They all agonize me. But the one that really does hurt my soul in a way that I can hardly bear even to think about it is what we're doing to the animals. Because I noticed 10 years ago that whenever I saw, for example, TV ads for abused animals, I would turn the channel because it's just too painful. And I've been noticing still that when there's a new advert about elephants disappearing, and there's a shot of a baby elephant that is starving to death quite clearly. And my first impulse is to change the channel. But now what I've understood is that my private sacred activism, which is advocacy for animal rights, I'm doing everything I can to stand up for animal rights, came out of my accepting that that was the single most terrible thing that I personally felt heartbroken about. What do you feel most heartbroken about? Feel it, realize you're being called to do something about it, start doing something about it, and you'll find you'll be graced extraordinary strength and passion and courage if you continue to do the practices.
And that's where you get all that energy to continue. I want to ask if anybody has any questions.
That's where all of us get that energy from. There's no other place. Practice takes the plug of your life and puts it into the socket of the electricity of God's energy. You think that Jane Goodall at 82, traveling the world, which was what she did before COVID, and I used to meet her at 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the morning all over the world in airports as we were going to do it. And Jane prays and meditates because that's where I remember once when I met Mother Teresa, I asked her in the 80s, I asked her, how the hell do you do it? I was a young man, so I could ask those kinds of forthright questions. And she said, I don't do it. I couldn't do it. I pray for the first hour and a half of the morning, and I fill up with the Christ, and I give it all away, and then I go to bed exhausted, and I do the same thing every day. That's what I do. That's what all of us do who have realized that we're being challenged to turn up as instruments of grace. You have to do the work. Always.
That's been stressed when we come together also. Oh, why am I having an echo? Are there any questions? Anybody want? No?
Please, please. There must be some questions. I would love to hear from you. I hope I'm reaching you.
I think so. I do think so. I had one other thing. I'm a retired teacher, and I wanted to see how you feel that our children are going to be influenced, and what you see as their spiritual evolution, and how can parents assist?
Yesterday, I was speaking to a friend of mine in Gaza. And that friend was sobbing and speaking of the absolutely terrifying effects on the children of Gaza that they've been feeling now for decades, and how they all grow up traumatized. Many, many children, and I'm speaking of people under 18, legal children, are far more awake than their parents are to the extremity of what's happening. Look, my friends, at Greta Thunberg. I saw a wonderful program the other night about Greta, and her father was this lovely hippie guy, said, I didn't give a damn about the climate. I was living my life and drinking and having a good time. And here I had this daughter who really just quietly but persistently said, are you out of your mind? Do you realize what's going on? And my whole life changed. So I think that there are two answers to your question. The first is that I think parents should spend a lot more time listening to the agony and the deep questions and the amazing brilliance of their children. Their children ask unspeakably clear questions about why they're acting in the way they're acting or not acting, and they should listen to the wisdom coming through the children. And the second thing is that parents should realize that their gift to their children is their modeling of how they changed their lives to really become serious about this crisis and contributive to its solution. Otherwise, what are they doing? They're just preparing their children for the great death machine of capitalism, the great death machine of ego and competition. What's that for? You might as well send your children to an abattoir and watch them get electrocuted.
Are there any other final, we have about 15 minutes left. Are there any other things that you would like to share with us?
Well, I'd love it if anybody else would like to ask a question. Surely, I like to be as clear as possible, but I cannot imagine that I have completely cleared up all the options and understanding. I'd love to. I'm here. I'm giving my time. Please ask me a question.
And we really appreciate your time.
Jacqueline has her hand up.
Hi, Andrew.
Jocelyn, hi. How are you? Thank you for.
I'm good.
What a lovely face.
You're delightful. Thank you. I just wanted to ask how you square activism with the idea of the Taoist idea of refraining from pushing the pendulum.
Well, I don't think that they're incompatible, because true sacred activism will know when not to act as well as when to act. And when not to act will be determined by Wu Wei, by that awareness. But if you saw somebody coming towards your child with a knife and went into a state of meditation, that would not be very helpful. That would not be a time not to act. And here we are with the climate in collapse. If we don't act, we will die out, and the seas will become totally polluted, and there'll be no food, and millions, if not the whole human race, will die. So Wu Wei in that situation is not going to be of much use.
Yeah, I guess I guess I bristled a little bit when you talked about mystics being narcissistic.
Well, that may be because it hurt something. It awoke you to something, because mystics, as they are, and particularly in America, are fantastically narcissistic. They really do believe that good vibrations will somehow feed the poor and unpollute the seas and make the Republicans responsible. Are you kidding me? You're going to have to do something. You're going to have to do something fed by mystical awareness and mystical strength. Be aware of that narcissistic shadow, because it's immense in this culture. And the New Age has done everything possible to expand it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
You see, the powers that be want mystics. I'll tell you a story which I think will amuse you. In 1991, I was in a home in Park Avenue in New York, and there was a group of very influential people talking about the Rio conference, the first conference on the environment. And everybody was saying, oh, the world's going to change, we'll all wake up, we'll all start doing something with the environment, and it'll be wonderful, rah, rah, rah. And there was this guy at the table who was a very famous, a billionaire, an English billionaire. And he was just watching all of this. And he came up to me afterwards and he said, I like you. You're a decent guy. I'd like to take you to lunch. And I said, well, as long as you're paying, I'd like to go to La Cirque, because I've never been to La Cirque. And he giggled and he said, yes, I'll meet you for lunch at La Cirque tomorrow. So I went to La Cirque and I had lunch with him. And he said to me something that completely changed my life. He said, what you don't understand is that the people who control the world, and I am one of them, as you know, aren't at all afraid of either activists as they are or mystics as they are. The activists will just slit their own throats by their vanity and their false messaging and their demonization of others. You can rely on them both to go into great egocentric quarrels between each other and to demonize each other, and then to make all kinds of mistakes which will just be easily solved by sending in the troops. You just send in the troops and you kill a few and they'll go away. Don't worry about it. And neither are we in any way worried by the mystics, because they're so selfish and they're so self-absorbed and they're so narcissistic. And all they want is peace of mind, what they imagine to be peace of mind. They don't want to engage with anything. And anyone who suggests to them that they should engage with anything will be demonized, because the last thing they want is to do anything. So you must wake up to this, he said. You've just got to see this as it is. And that was one of the conversations that made me wake up and help me create sacred activism. Because I realized then that you have two sensitive groups of people who are both hopelessly narcissistic. The mystics just pursuing their endless dreams of private liberation without really doing much for anyone else or caring much about the agony of the world. And activists so concerned to be the smartest and wisest and most just and the noblest beings in the room that they preen and prance and annihilate each other with different kinds of egomaniacal madness. That's where we are. But as I said, if you unite the best of both, you have a wholly new kind of human being. So mystics have to get off their cushion occasionally and actually do something and care about the world. And activists have to get onto their cushion and calm down and be fed by diviner sources of courage and wisdom. And the two will come together, or could. It's the only possible hope. Listen to the billionaires. They know they're not there. I'm very grateful for listening to his totally ruthless, cynical wisdom, because he's in control. They're in control. They know the whole story. They know how the New Age just keeps this ghastly culture going, and that the activists just make the right-wing maniacs stronger. It's perfect, perfect, perfect lunatic asylum.
That was very interesting. One of your other quotes, I don't know why we have that echo, is hurry slowly and play as much as you work. And that play as much as you work really is powerful. And in one of your books, you talked about how you work all morning, then you take a break, meditate, and then you go back to work.
Well, it varies in my case, but what I meant by that is that's actually Carolyn describing how we created our book.
Oh, okay.
But I think that if you don't find a balance between intense work and profound play, you're going to become a very unbalanced person. And we need balanced people at this moment. It's very hard when you're really involved in sacred activism to find time for play. But the sacred activists that I know who are the most successful and the most persistent and the most long-lasting also have the best sense of humor, have the most joy in friendship, love to go out to dinner when they can and enjoy their friends, love to celebrate life. The key is to keep celebrating life, so that you can draw from that celebration the strength and the guts and the persistence and the passion and the joy to keep going.
Yes, we definitely need that now.
Yes.
I'll ask one more time if anybody has a question.
And if possible, have a pet, because I have to tell you that one of the great joys of my life, actually the greatest joy of my life, is my cat, because I've been spending all this year I've been zooming away and writing and, being Andrew Harvey, that strange person. But I've also been playing with my cat in between, and that she has taught me so much and given me so much. So having a pet to love and a pet that has such a joy in life, playing with your dog or your cat can be the most extraordinary restorative possible way of staying sane. Another practical suggestion, Anne, you see. Simple tips for complicated adventures, right?
And your animals show unconditional love. So
they do, and they're naughty. And they're not concerned with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. They're concerned about fancy feast. So they do remind you of the essentials of life.
Or you could say they're just as egocentric as the rest of us modern mystics.
I don't think they are. I think they're much less egocentric. Because they're much more loving. One of the things that if you spend any time in New Age circles with all of their talk about love, 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 is how extremely unloving they become if you deign to disagree with them. Somehow they're not one with you, although they're one with the whole of the rest of the universe. It's all very comic when you see it.
Lynn, I had just a quick question. Andrew, that last book just feels so comprehensive. I'm just curious what you're working on now. What excites you now? What feels like is next?
Oh, thank you for asking. I'm actually very excited about writing a book on Mary Magdalene and the real relationship between Mary Magdalene and Jesus, and about all the extraordinary women mystics who fought against the patriarchy and the hierarchy to get their incredible vision out in the Christian church. I love Christian mysticism, and I love these wild, wonderful women because very few people know them. We've had years and years of the boys' club, and obviously I'm a boy, and etc., etc. But I've learned so much from these astounding women, and they kick ass, these women. These are the most ferocious, wild, holy, imaginable voices. So I'm writing about them, and I've just finished a big book about one of the greatest of them, whom I'm trying to bring back for everybody because I think she's incredibly important for us right now. And she has the fantastic name. It's one of the great names. Andrew Harvey, such a silly little name compared to Hadovich of Antwerp. And she lived in the 13th century. And she had a terrible, difficult life. But my God, the work that she produced out of it is simply mind-blowing. And I've just done a huge book introducing her to the world because she's been largely forgotten. But she's one of the most important universal mystical voices ever. So that thrills me. I want to get all of the great, noble, wild, holy voices out so that we can have as much inspiration available to us as we go into this infernal transmutation.
Beautiful. And we need that. Would you like to end with a poem or a prayer? Do you have a
Yes, I would love to. I would love to.
And I'm just going to give you a website. It's andrewharvey.net. There's several websites, but if you put in Sacred Activism and Andrew Harvey, you'll find some of them.
And there's lots of free stuff. So sign up, and there's a 9-hour version of The Hope with me reading it. If you can stand that, you'll get the whole vision of sacred activism that I want to offer you for free, with lots of very simple, practical suggestions. So this is Rumi. Enjoy, my friends. A man started to break up the earth with a spade. A fool came and shouted at him, "Why are you ruining the soil?" "You idiot," the man cried, "go away and don't bother me. Understand the difference between destruction and growth. How could this soil become a rose garden or wheat field before it's broken up and ruined and made ugly? How could it become orchards and harvests and leaves and fruit before it is utterly destroyed and worn down? Before you can pierce an abscess with a knife, how can it heal? And how can you regain your health? Until the doctor purifies your humors with his cures, how can your illness disappear and true healing arrive? When a tailor cuts up a cloth piece by piece, does anyone go up to him and strike him and say, "Why have you torn up this beautiful satin? What can I do with scraps of torn up cloth?" Each time that builders come to repair an old building, don't they begin by destroying what was there before? Look at the carpenter, or the blacksmith, or the butcher. With them too, you'll find destruction precedes renewal. If you don't subject wheat to the grinding millstone, how will bread ever come to decorate your table? Simple enough, Anne?
It's a gorgeous, gorgeous treat to have you read it to us. What a gift.
You've been my treat. Lovely to meet you. I love your face. I love your spirit.
Thank you. And I want to thank Lynn. I want to thank everyone on the Satsang team and all of you being with us. We've put Andrew's website in the box, and I tell you that book, while you know the false separate self may go, this is too scary, this is too real, this is too stark a look, allowing ourselves to let Andrew guide us through both the darkness and then the breaking apart and the light is a journey, and it's just a guide.
Yes.
So I just, on behalf of all of us at Awakening Together, Andrew, I just really want to thank you on behalf of Lynn, myself, and everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Saina. Thank you, Jacqueline. God bless you. God bless you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.